McLean. Deck Coach's Corner.
You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer.
For someone to explain.
Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode number 36 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and joining me today is Stuart Lierich. Stu is a specialist kicking coach from Australia and comes from an Aussie Rules background. After a semi-professional playing career, he began coaching with a VFL team and really connected with the coaching process. With a keen interest in kick catch, Stu then found himself in rugby union and rugby league after moving to Brisbane 15 years ago. He's now with the NEC Green Rockets Rugby in Japan's top league. Was recently appointed as the Account Manager for Australia and New Zealand for Coach Logic, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show, Stu, so welcome.
Andy, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on, did you say 36 episodes, or this is number 36?
This is number 36, yeah.
Well done to you. I know, look, there's probably not a lot of rugby podcasts around. Obviously, that's why you are the number one. But in terms of that, I think to sustain that takes a lot of effort, a lot of dedication, and a lot of late nights by the sounds of it as well. So well done to you. And I've been listening to virtually all of them. I think there's a couple I need to catch up on from recent times, but enjoyed everyone. So thanks for sharing and putting that out to the wider rugby community.
Oh, awesome, mate. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I love doing it. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's super rewarding, and especially, you know, when I get to transfer everything I learn from the show, not only what people listen to, you know, when I coach, it's worth it totally. So yeah, thanks
Absolutely.
Again. Cheers. All right, so we touched a little bit on your playing and coaching. So we'll go into a bit more depth there about your Aussie Rules playing and coaching, and then how that's transferred into rugby.
Sure, Andy. Well, I can tell you that they're definitely not going to write a book on my backstory. In fact, you said touched on it. I think you've probably said it all. Look, yeah. For me, I always remember when I was in year 12 at school, so about 15 years old, the Australian Sports Commission had a program where they would actually empower young people in their last year of high school to actually go to primary schools within their city or within their town. I think it was called Aussie Sports Leaders or something like that.
Okay.
And it was general sports coaching for primary school kids that they were actually allowing teenagers to do. There wasn't, you know, perhaps as is the case these days, there probably wasn't a lot of training and foundation and development that they put in. But I always remember being captured by running sessions and coaching people, particularly those that are younger than myself, way back then. So whether you say it's been in my blood or not, I'm not sure. But I've always, I've always been connected to although I'm not a qualified teacher per se, I've always been well connected to the teaching process. So to have that as an interest after finishing playing football was an easy transition for me, whereas I think for a lot of people that set their sights only on a playing career in sport may find that a little more challenging, certainly that transition time. But for me, with my football, as you said, it was semi-professional. I grew up down south in Australia, which is, as you know, AFL heartland.
Sadly.
Growing up, yeah, that's right. Well, I have to say, I know I'm on the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast, and I work in rugby league and predominantly rugby union now. But I do love all sports, and I think from a coaching point of view, it's important for our learning that if we're able to just open our minds up a bit, there's a whole lot we can learn from coaches of other sports. So I look at, you know, I guess all of my touch points with sport, including, you know, a brief history playing at Norwood and a tiny bit at Williamstown in the VFL there, that, you know, those experiences, almost like bank deposits, even though they were a long time ago, I think if we use them wisely, they can help us to be on our journey or continue on our journey wherever we may take that, even if that's in a business sense rather than a coaching sense.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it probably leads me into, you know, the first question is, you know, what from your Aussie Rules experience, what are some of the key things that rugby coaches can take away from the Aussie Rules game in terms of kick catch?
Well, the first thing I'll say, Andy, and look, I'm not sure of the context of this exactly, but in the part of the world that I live in, Queensland, which is dominated by the rugby codes from a participation perspective, certainly from the number of teams, the AFL is quite strong and it certainly continues to grow. But there is a perception, there has been for a long time, that if you've played Australian rules football, you'd make a really good coach, or certainly they, in inverted commas, AFL players kick really well, so we should just get someone that's played AFL to come and coach. So this perception, I'm not saying that I'm here to break it down, but in any sport there are good practitioners and not so good practitioners, but we have this perception in rugby that AFL players are better kickers. Now, the sport requires it, and I certainly think at the highest level in the Australian rules, the AFL competition, there are a lot of players that aren't actually elite kicks of the ball, but they still look smooth, they still look nice, and it's all silky, and it's a different way to kick, perhaps visually to look at on the screen. But it's just not something that we should say because it's Australian rules football that we'll just get anyone in to coach. I guess, and really, I guess the extension of that point is that regardless of what we're coaching, rather than drills, we still need to make sure that our coaching principles are sound and able to be adapted to that sport that we are going to coach. To answer your question, though, Andy, I've digressed, haven't I?
That's all good.
Look, the thing that I would say from a rugby point of view, the best AFL kickers, so not all, but the best AFL kickers or kickers of an Australian rules football are very highly adaptable, and I think that's something that we need to understand as skills coaches or as coaches that are looking to incorporate kicking into our rugby programs. That with Australian rules football being a 360-degree game, those perhaps your listeners that aren't familiar with it, with having no offside and seemingly teammates and defenders at any angle around your periphery, it does promote players to have to be very adaptable at how they kick the ball, certainly how they play the game, but from a kicking point of view, that would be the thing that I would say is something that we can learn in rugby. And I guess to extend that further, what I'm saying is that Australian rules football really asks you to be able to be very good at using your time and space that's available, because pressure is effectively anywhere and everywhere. If we look at the catching perspective as well, now that's probably something that, well, in my experience, it's something that's very much undercoached in rugby.
Absolutely, yeah.
And something that I'm quite passionate about. I think that when we look at catching, I think what Australian rules football can teach rugby coaches about catching is that if you think back to when you were a boy, Andy, which I know wasn't that long ago.
Oh, it was long enough. Yep.
And there are still coaches coaching this way now, but you remember the if you were a back or a fullback and you're looking to take that high catch, it was all about self-preservation, turning the body, or you'd even hear the coaches talking about dominate the space, which I still hear today. But for me, what I find most of those coaches really mean when they're talking about dominate the space is the space in front of the player between he and or she, and their defender. But what I believe AFL can teach us, and I try to incorporate this into my coaching as well, is that for me, dominate the space or create a dominant position in the catch is actually looking above the catch line. So if you picture now, and I guess your listeners, if they were to picture a player, one knee up, looking to jump, and they've got the open palms looking to the sky, elbows together in that sort of bucket catch position.
Yeah.
That space straight ahead of you and in front of you is what most coaches would like to coach, dominate that space. But this is what I call the catch line right there. For me, the magic and the opportunity is above that catch line. So if you can get a nice leap, obviously time your leap, you can get higher than the other player, but perhaps above the catch line, then I think we can start to take more catches for ourselves or start to create this dominance in the contest. And I guess, again, I'm talking about even, dare I say it, I know you're going to have some people that might risk having an accident when they hear this, but I'm saying use your hands as well. I think that's
like an
definitely
overhead position.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of the mindset in rugby has come from sort of playing safe and preserving ourselves from injury and other things. But what Australian rules football teaches all of us, really. And again, it's how I was raised, is that ball is your only focus. And if we are committed to the ball with only thoughts and eyes for it, then I believe we stand a better chance of catching it and not getting injured. Again, this is a little bit controversial for a lot of people, I know, but it's a risk and reward. I certainly think that the space above this catch line and the opportunity to start coaching in the hands where that opportunity presents. Obviously, you're not going to be required to do that on every catch attempt, but certainly when you've got 2 or 3 defenders around, I think that you need to get up above that.
Yeah, well, and you're seeing a lot of that come in, especially in sevens with restarts and restarts in general. You'll tend to see the kicking team when they're competing for that ball in the air that a lot of the successful restart turnovers are as a result of that overhead catch.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. And for anyone that it didn't quite follow my description through the radio, then if you put in some sort of a Google search or a YouTube search for Australian rules football, high marks or high catches, you'll certainly know what I'm talking about. And hopefully it would start to break down your perception of safety. And it's all about building skill. And if you're competent in your skill and you've got nice, strong hands and soft fingers, then, I believe anything's possible in the right scenario.
All right, sweet. Okay, so from now that you're pretty immersed in the rugby community, what are some of the most common errors you see in the area of kick catch, and then to reverse those, what are some of the favourite coaching cues you use?
Sure, Andy. I guess, look, this is probably not what you'd say is an error per se, but I mentioned before one of the biggest things for me, or the underlying themes with my coaching, is helping players improve their use of time and space. So that might just be take the pass, get into the kick, or it might be you could be a back three, the opposition's kicked over your head and they've turned you around. Just for you to be able to use the time to get to the ball to make the decision on whether we exit or whether we run, and certainly getting yourself into that position to be able to do it effectively rather than plod along to get back and obviously waste that valuable time in doing so. So this is not an error, but it's certainly something that is common, a common observation for myself. Players that are very, very loose in the way that they kick. So I'd use the word compact. If we imagine a compact player is someone that certainly gets the job done, gets the kick executed in a fashion that's fast and efficient, but also fluent and smooth as well. This is really the pathway that I want to work players towards kicking. But those that don't have a lot of, I suppose I was going to say kick volume, but those that haven't really been coached with structure or framework tend to not have yet identified or understood this concept of time and space. So that's certainly one thing that I would say as an error or an observation. And the other one too, Andy, is one that this is terminology I've developed for myself, and I'm sure lots of other skills coaches would have observed this, but I call it the ball outside the gates. So often a player, if we talk about alignment to target, for argument's sake, if we're kicking down a straight line, the gates are your legs. So, or basically between your hips. When I'm talking to a group of players, I tend to tap my thighs and refer to my legs. But wherever we're facing, that ball really needs to stay in there for the ride. Now, I'm not going to go down the path of saying, hey, you should hold it and it should be aligned over the kicking leg, as perhaps was the case when I was a kid. But if you imagine that we are running down a particular path now, and if we change direction to the right or to the left, often you'll find that ball, the player won't bring that ball back still inside the gates to keep that impact line. Right. So they're shifting their hips in their direction, but the ball can either skew inside or outside based on not bringing it in. So again, this is just something that ties into being compact with our movements, but also keeping the ball with an alignment that allows us to get that nice sweet strike through that line that we're aiming for.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, because I find coaching in North America, there's, apart from soccer, there's not many kicking sports around. Like there's Canadian or American football, but there's one person who does that role. You tend to come across a lot of rugby players who who have developed, they might be in their mid-20s and they've developed really poor kicking habits.
Yes.
And I find that from my coaching experience, that's very hard to undo. They tend to be really wooden, and it's difficult to get them into a good kicking shape and develop a good kicking technique. Do you find that if they've gotten to a certain point, it's more difficult to wind that back, or has your experiences been different?
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Andy. And I haven't identified an age. It obviously varies between context and country and club and what have you. But it's probably not as old as what we think. You know, that threshold there. And certainly, if you were to talk to those that are a lot more academic than myself in these subjects, I think they would tend to agree. And certainly from those conversations that I've had, which probably raises that importance or that conversation that goes on now about the quality of coaching and certainly skill acquisition coaching in that junior developmental pathway stage of rugby.
Yeah.
I think this is where we really need to have a lot of that grounding to help them transition to senior rugby. And even if they don't aspire to be professional, still get the most enjoyment out of their own games and performances at whatever level they play. Again, I said there was 2, but there's actually 3. The other observation I have, and again, I probably won't call it an error. Again, it's just that it's something that I observe a lot with players that perhaps haven't been coached to improve their kicking skill. And it's the concept of transferring weight through the kick. So I call that the handbrake or the park brake. Mm-hmm. So a lot of players are leg kickers, or they kick with mostly the power of their leg as a strategy that we can having a whole of body go through. So for anyone that may have heard any of my work before, I'm big on talking about kicking being a whole of body movement. So from a coaching perspective, we need to make sure that we respect that and we incorporate our observations to understand that it's a whole of body movement. But from a playing point of view, a lot of players will kick and their plant foot, be it goal kicking or even kicking in general play, tends to be anchored or rooted to the ground, which can create a little bit of what's counterproductive from an energy perspective. But we can lose distance and accuracy and control simply by not having our body go through that kick. Now, I'm not necessarily just talking about the follow through that most people would refer in terms of the kicking leg itself. It's not really a big function that plays. But what we do want to have is our torso, our pillar, shoulders to hips, moving through that ball. And I guess posture is very important in that respect. So I work a lot in improving posture with kicking, but also having players understand and begin to transfer their weight through the kicks. It makes a massive difference. So take the park brake off, Andy, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it sounds great. Okay, so when you start with a new group, what's your first session generally look like?
Look, I try to do, regardless of whether you get paid to coach or you don't get paid to coach, I think we can all be professional, right? So the first thing I would do or do is to try and get some information on the group, maybe some individuals, maybe I'll talk to the head coach. And I guess from my perspective, for the benefit of your listeners, I'm seen as a project coach. Now, even though I have a week-to-week over the season job with a Premier grade club here in Brisbane, most of the work where I travel to other countries or work with other teams, I'm seen as a project coach. So I may not necessarily know much or anything about a playing group. So I like to, if I've got the opportunity, I guess this is not necessarily for your academy or your school level, but if there's film on players, I might have a pre-meeting or a phone call, or a coach might send me some information about the group or about specific individuals. And I think that's really important, because anything that I've got up my sleeve will help me with my observations when I first meet them, but it also helped me plan for my sessions and the specific activities as well. So that's the first thing that I'd say is preparation is key from that point of view, if you can. But as is often the case, you're not able to. But what I don't do, Andy, is I don't start at the start. I don't have in my mind, look, I never have any preconceived ideas about how a group should be kicking. So I don't walk in with the, if there was a textbook for kicking, I'd like to see, but I don't walk in with the textbook and say, the first thing that they'll really need to know is about how to grip. So we'll do a little grip station, then we'll do the approach, and then we'll do the drop, and then we'll do. So for me, it just doesn't work like that. And any coach worth their salt would understand that now, that it's applied in a different way. So I jump in within the context. I still want them to reach and be challenged. I go for chaos. I go for active, but I also go for activities that involve a whole of group, so that in one 10 or 15 minute block of a game or a scenario, I'm looking at their movement, I'm looking at how they align, I'm looking at their use of time and space, I'm looking at all the things that I should as a kicking coach, but under pressure, with some decision making, and it might not be, well, often it's not specifically geared towards the game of rugby, so it's not strict scenario, but it's not too novel either that it's that far away. And I guess from there, what it does, it helps me almost take a snapshot of where I think the group is at, and also help me individually make some observations that I can help players further on in the session or the program. I hope that makes sense. I try to make it very active, but also challenging, because I think this zone where we're making mistakes and is a little bit ugly and uncomfortable is certainly where the learning takes place. But I'm always careful to make sure that I set the tone for the session or the program, what I'm looking to achieve and what I'd hope they'd like to achieve as well. So no one's made to feel uncomfortable for making mistakes. Mm-hmm. We try and make sure that it's a safe environment and they understand what we're trying to achieve together before we do that. So it's all set up in that way to allow for that.
Yeah, cool. And that kind of leads me to my next question too. Like, you know, being a backs coach, I can create a game-based session about any general part of rugby, whether it be attack or the breakdown or tackle or catch pass decision making, all that. I find that no problems to make a large percentage of my sessions games based. I've always struggled to make kicking games based, and it sounds like exactly what you're talking about there is that you make it very games based, which it should be. And you know, I like that word chaos, and you know, I totally agree that, you know, when athletes are uncomfortable, that's where the learning happens. It may not look the prettiest, and neither does rugby sometimes. So, you know, a lot of the time. So, how do you go about what's some examples that you could possibly, you know, articulate on a audio podcast about how you make your kicking sessions games based?
Sure. Well, I guess before I get to that, I'd say that again, having an understanding of the program you're working in. Let's say you're working for a particular team. So the head coach and the assistant coaches have all got a philosophy of gameplay, game style, obviously to a point where they've got set shapes and structures. So I need to have what I feel I need to have is I need to have a technical work on component. I won't use the word technique, but I'll call it technical. And we also have the what specifically the coaches want to achieve during a game, and I need to be able to intertwine those two things together. Often, what I do is if I have a scenario that the coaches would want, then I might have a couple of dropout stations running in tandem or alongside that. Again, it depends on the type of club you're working for, and many coaches out there won't have support or someone else to be able to help them. And I find that's quite the case for me as well. I'm usually the guy, if I'm working at an amateur club or a community club, usually you're the guy in the corner that no one helps. You're sort of on your own. So you learn to look after yourself. But look, to answer that question from a specific perspective, pardon me, if it can't be a game, then it must be a challenge. So not all the time are you going to have 5v5 or 6v6 or 8v8 or even 15 versus 15 to be able to do this. So I understand people may be listening thinking, well, he coaches professionally, it's easy with such big numbers. But look, still a fair portion of my work when I'm not in Japan is at the junior and amateur level or semi-professional level. And sometimes you turn up to a session, you're expecting 12, but there's only 6. What do you do? So if you can't play a game, then you must be able to, I guess the cliche is think on your feet, but if we can create a challenge against each other, you know, if you can't have the numbers to make a game, then I guess you've got to try and find some sort of competitive aspect that you can bring into it. For me, Andy, I guess it can vary, but I have probably 4 or 5 core activities that are geared towards the general scenarios that every team would face within a game. So you'd have the one where down the tram line there might be a big kick over the head of the oncoming, say, an original chase. So the ball's gone down the tram line inside the 22. We've turned, say, the back three around.
Yep.
The team that have kicked have obviously worked a nice, hard, connected chase. Depending on, again, what your team philosophy is. At NEC, we work on hard chase and getting our connection. So you can bring a few elements into it.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
A game could be putting that in a smaller area with smaller numbers. It might be 4v4. So then you can just rotate. The kicking team becomes the chasing team. Now, if we've got a framework, a decision that needs to be made for the now team in possession, do they link up and support and try and run that ball? Do they go into a ruck if there is enough numbers, or what sort of assessment can we make? Do we have to kick it out? So I guess the game should all be based on having them have those choices that they would have as part of the game plan, but the session needs to be able to test them and their ability to make that decision in that moment. And there's also the one that I like to play before any specifics that might relate to what the coaches want for their team. It's like a game of touch football on a small pitch, very modified with markers, and I have two in-goal areas, one behind the other at each end, and they are kicking zones for points. So it's touch football with, say, 3 touches and you can and a turnover, but at any time you can kick for more points. So you get more points to kick it in that in-goal area without it being caught or diffused, as opposed to a try. So you're bringing the elements of touch football and skill and catch pass, but also giving the license to kick and, again, try and find space.
Yeah,
and I usually
kick tactically.
That's right. So I usually mix that up with kicks coming in, kicks to the pocket. We might look at it. Obviously, there's the contestable area as well. Different teams that have their own policies on when and who. Obviously, it's usually the 9 or the scrum half. But I think if you can't make a game, you could certainly make a challenge for points or a challenge against the other players to bring out that competitive nature and try and build some of those pressures that may exist in a game. Although that is very difficult.
No, that's great. No, definitely some things to take away there, and I'll be definitely rolling that out this season with some of those ideas, and I think it's great just to get ideas like that, and then you just adapt them to your environment and change the rules as you see fit. And like during that time, are you then identifying individually, okay, that person needs this bit of advice, that person needs this bit of advice, I question here, question there, drip feed
yes,
that way?
Yep, absolutely, spot on. And I guess if it's a player you're in the training and the playing performing match cycle, then you've already got an inbuilt understanding of how they performed on the weekend or what their last 3 games have been like. And if you've had that conversation with them about that, he or she should already know what you're working towards. And I guess that's their opportunity to do that without being overcoached as such, or having that license to do that in that situation. So it's spot on, Andy.
Yeah, and it sounds also that a lot of those kind of games you're relying heavily on implicit learning rather than, you being, the knowledgeable coach who can explain every facet of kick catch.
Yes, I have to say though that look, it took me a really long time, maybe longer than others, and I think this is a really good age now for coaches in terms of really understanding what good practice is in terms of coaching behaviour. But that definitely was not the way that I used to coach earlier, and certainly when you're trying to prove yourself. Self-image is a big thing, and I connected it to what I do for a job, and I guess my job is slightly. Look, I think everyone's a kicking coach, really, Andy, because if you coach a rugby team, you're a kicking coach, right? You have to help your players somehow. But in terms of what I did, I think I made too much emphasis on understanding a lot about movement principles, a lot about the technical aspects of kicking, but. Of course, as we only know too well, there's just only so much information that's actually truly effective right then and there in the moment for our players. So I worked on Certainly, I feel like I'm still working on my feedback delivery, the frequency, the amount. But when you've got your own little, it's almost like your own little vocab that your players begin to understand. And this is where I think that working with a team with continuity allows. I mean, let's face it, you would agree, I'm sure, that relationships and connectivity are everything.
Absolutely.
And when you have a new group, particularly, I've travelled to various countries, and it's not just going to different cultures, but if I've got terminologies or analogies for certain things they haven't heard of, then I know that it's going to take them a little while, maybe 2 or 3 times to have heard that. That does require some explanation. So you might not get traction for a couple of sessions in some instances, but I think less is definitely more. And if you have some analogies in those cues, then that one word would be a whole sentence to a player's understanding.
Absolutely.
You don't have to, because I think flow, particularly with the way that I want my sessions to be, I'm certainly encouraging of giving them a framework to try and solve problems, and okay if it doesn't work out or they make a mistake. And often with a new group, I'm not necessarily looking for them to kick goals or hit that target. My main objective is actually to see how the player moves, because to me that's more important at that stage. But couldn't agree more. It's all about saying less to achieve more.
Okay, great, awesome. Okay, and during your sessions or even post sessions, what kind of expectations do you place on players in order to take ownership of their own skill development?
Look, again, I suppose I answered that partly in the last question. I've always felt, regardless of what business you're in, what sport you're in, the world turns based on the quality of relationships. So that would depend on how well the player knew me, and I guess how well I knew the player. Whether you can go a little bit harder or you don't go that hard, I suppose, in terms of what you might apply for that expectation. But if you've got really good buy-in, so if even you don't know a player particularly well, I think if they buy into your philosophy, if they believe in you, then, or believe in what you're trying to achieve for them, the whole two-way street, I think it's much easier to be able to have higher expectations of players, even without a strong relationship yet. But look, I'm all about trying to give players the tools, Andy, to drive their own, to be in charge of their own destiny or their own development. So I like players to take a bit of ownership there, and it can be a little bit confronting for players. Particularly, it's a challenge at the moment in Japan, the culture there, and I'm generalising here. It's not every player, but generally they're quite willing for coaches to instruct and tell them what to do. They almost expect it. But our coaching regime, I suppose, at NEC at the moment, headed up by Peter Russell and Dave Dillon, is certainly about empowering, asking a lot of questions, and putting it to the players to solve those problems, being facilitated and within a framework. But that can be hard. But I want my players to be coached in that way, that I'm also happy for them to place expectations on themselves. So, I've probably been really fluffy. I think I have been really fluffy about answering that question. But it depends on what they're wanting to achieve for themselves. And I think if you can outline that early enough, what they're looking to achieve either from your coaching, I guess from me, it's kick and catch. If it's about improving their game, then we'll look at what aspects they need to do to improve their game, and before you know it, you've got a treasure map there ready to go, and we can just work towards it together.
Yeah, and I think if you turn up to practice and you see a couple of your players 10 minutes before the session starts going through some stuff you worked on last session, you're on the right track.
Definitely, that's exactly right. And the old adage, I suppose it was a cliche from when I was growing up, an Australian colloquialism about leading the horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right?
No, exactly.
There's only so much a coach can do, but if you've got the buy-in, you've inspired them enough, they'll certainly go and make that effort, because they can see that there'll be payoff from it for sure.
All right, then. During your sessions, what kind of technology do you use to assist your coaching for kick catch?
Look, for me, most of my time is still spent outside of a professional club. So for anyone listening, I don't have an exorbitant amount of equipment or technology or a budget as a coach that travels or consults. So for me, I've found that there's certainly been a learning curve in developing these little work hacks for yourself to be able to gather information and share it. But this I don't know if this is going to surprise anyone, but there's nothing groundbreaking about what I use. I mean, some examples, Andy, are I definitely invested in a good camera. I have a GoPro. Well, it's a Hero 3 now. It's a couple of years old, but still really high quality camera that has the head strap.
Yep.
So I've used that on a number of occasions with some teams here in Brisbane. With a particular player, we want the first receiver, say the 10, to play straight, draw the defence, obviously not pass too early, whatever it might be, whatever your cues are. We've used that to show the player that he wasn't actually square and he probably passed too early, because we're showing the view from the player's perspective after. Right, the penny can drop. I wouldn't say that that's something you'd use all the time, but I've got the GoPro with a head strap. I've got the tripod there. I think my smartphone, my iPhone and my iPad are my best friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are loaded with, I think I've got Coach's Eye at the moment, but there are a number of, as you would know, there's a number of motion analysis apps that are free or only a couple of dollars that you can put on your phone. And I only use that for goal kicking.
Yeah.
I think that, the self-paced skill of goal kicking is much easier to technically assess using the tools or the sharing capabilities of that app to the player. Or even just to give some in-session feedback is particularly good without drawing. Just being able to do a frame by frame if you need to. And sometimes, depending on the club as well, I might have what I call a feedback station on the side of the field. So I'll have a picnic table, like a fold-up picnic table with a screen, and my iPad will have a HDMI connection to that screen. So if I need to bring a couple of coaches over as well, rather than show them on the phone, I might be able to just, in between a session block change, I might be able to just show them some feedback of what I've seen out there as well, so everyone's on the same page. But that's probably from an in-session perspective. From a coding point of view, look, I know how to use sports code. I don't have it on my laptop because I don't earn enough money to have that for myself, but it's usually something that is pride and place at a lot of professional rugby clubs, which I've used before from a statistical perspective as well. Longo Match is something that I've also used.
It's a beauty.
There's a pro, and you've got that one.
Yeah, I love it.
It's incredible the capabilities of that for free. And if you want to pay a little bit more, you just get you get so much. So there's a good tip out there for everyone.
That's been developing for about 5 or 6, maybe even more years, and it's right. Unreal now. Like compared to where they started to where it is now, it's like the free version is outstanding for any club coach. That's really pretty good technology right there.
Definitely. Now, I guess one of my favorite areas of coaching is looking at analysis and feedback. Certainly when we're trying to tie that into effective outcomes and improvement for our players. So given that you've got a coding system that's on your laptop, I suppose that missing link often is the case with teams and coaches, is actually transferring that information, that statistical data, to useful information for the players. So I guess it goes without saying that Coach Logic is pride of place wherever I am and wherever I work for myself, let alone the role that I have, because it's just a really functional way of enhancing the coaching process and allowing coaches to share information to other computers or players' phones, that clips all of the things necessary for that player to need to know.
Why don't we go into that then? We had Andy Muir on from Coach Logic early on in the podcast, and I touched on it a bit in the intro. You're the account manager for Australia and New Zealand. What's that role entail? And if people want to get in touch with you, how's the best way to do that?
Well, Andy, the role entails, and the opportunity only came late last year when I was, I suppose, going into that planning phase for my year this year. And one thing I've realised for a long time, as I said earlier, I just love talking and communicating with coaches of all sports and helping people. So Andy and Mark's business, I guess, has grown to a point where down here. They've heard about it, which is great. So essentially servicing the existing user base or clientele, providing technical support, but also helping to onboard the new customers or clubs and teams that are wanting to use the platform as well. So really, I'm a coach helping coaches, and that's a really nice fit for me. We certainly don't see ourselves as salespeople per se, even though it's a business and a product. We certainly feel that because we are coaches, and it's a product that's developed out of our own needs or out of the needs of those that founded it. It is a really good fit for us because it's an extension of what we do anyway, helping other people with their coaching practice.
Yeah, well, I've used it in the past, and I really like the setup. And I get nothing from saying this. I'm just saying it as a coach myself that I like what there is, and if people are interested, they should definitely at least have a look at it, compared to what else is on the market.
Oh, thanks for that, Andy. Look, if anyone in the Asia Pacific was interested in at least having a look, or look, sometimes, Andy, as we would all know, we don't know what we don't know. But if you're a coach that values the improvement of your players from a skill and performance perspective, and you do film games, or you're wanting to take some visual representation of performances, then Coach Logic is a platform to be able to allow you to do that, and it is geared up and designed for teams at all levels. It's certainly very affordable. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand or in that Asia part of the world, then look, I don't know how you'd go about sending an email, Andy, or whether I could say that now. How would you prefer me to?
Yeah, well, I can put your contact details in the show notes, and then listeners,
Perfect.
if they're keen, they can track you down that way. I'll put your Twitter and your Coach Logic email address in there.
And I'm always up for a coaching chat, regardless of that.
No doubt, no doubt. All right, great. Well, we always end the show with the same final four questions. When you were a kid growing up, who was your favorite? Who was your favourite athlete, footy player, rugby league, rugby union, depending on where you're going to go? You're pretty diverse background. Who are the ones who got you into the sport?
Can I have two for my answer, Andy? Is that okay?
Of course.
All right. So the first one, because of being a dyed-in-the-wool Demons supporter in Melbourne, I wanted to be Robbie Flower. Now, For most of your listeners, that wouldn't resonate so much, but for me,
nothing with me.
As someone who's now 42 and hasn't put on a lot of weight since he was 16 or 17, Robbie Flower was not your muscle-bound poster boy of Australian rules football. He was a silky, skillful winger, captain of his team for a very long time, played nearly 300 games, and quite an inspirational player for his state as well. And I guess someone that I connected with in terms of how he played, but I guess the sort of person he was. So, for many years I wanted to be Robert Flower, but I also wanted to be Wally Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that might be a name that even those outside of rugby union would know. But
it's 2 weeks in a row that he's been mentioned.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Our last, Scott Allen also, that was his favourite.
It's such a Queensland thing
totally.
To say. But in terms of inspiration and skill, they don't come in much better packages than Wally Lewis. And living in Melbourne at the time, that's really how I got an interest in rugby union and rugby league, Andy.
That's big.
Well, back in the day, I had to get up at about 5:30, 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning to tape on my VHS recorder the ABC match of the day from the day before and watch it. And that was when the Broncos had first started. And of course, we used to watch. My family, we used to watch all of the Wallabies Test matches back then as well. But free-to-air television, I guess, didn't really show a lot of rugby union, even though I was aware of it. And my love for both sports really developed from there.
Oh, great. Okay, and what about now? Who's one of your favourite players going around in rugby?
One of my favourites. That's very good because you can't pick a favourite, can you? But I'm going to give a massive special mention to someone that I know very well and have coached, and that's Juan Martin Hernandez from now the Jaguares and the Pumas. I think in terms of longevity of a career, of course he has had some injury troubles of late, but in terms of the service that he's given to the game, some of the wonderful entertainment that he's provided us as well with his skillful feats.
Classy.
And I'm just someone that's fortunate enough to have been a very small part of his journey, but to get to know his professionalism, how he applies himself, how he looks after his body. He's a fantastic family man. That's certainly the whole package for me, Andy. Although I don't know how much longer one has left in the game at the top level.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic, and I think he was a big reason why, and everyone's gotten on board with Argentina and what they do and the style of rugby they play. I think he's great. Okay, and what about coaches? Who's a coach with a profile that you respect and like what they're doing?
Another person I know, not that this is meant to be a name drop, because lots of coaches know lots of people, but I guess you can put someone forward if you've got a little bit of an insight as to how they are as a person as well. But my mention here will go to Bernard Jackman from Grenoble in France in the top 14. As I'm sure you know Bernard, or know of Bernard too,
sure.
Andy, to come from a really strong playing background in Ireland to start as a consultant, working defence, to get a bigger opportunity to now be a respected coach in world rugby is just is phenomenal. Let alone having to learn how to speak French, by the way. Learning rugby's hard enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I follow him on Twitter. He puts out some great stuff, and I got pretty excited when he favorited one of our tweets the other day. So I'm a fan for sure.
Saw that. I saw that. Well done.
No,
well done.
Very excited. Definitely want to get him on the show for sure.
Oh, that's good. What it shows me is that he, as many are out there, but there are those amongst us that can be a little bit too cool for school. And for anyone that wants to see the model of showing that you don't have to be someone at a particular level and change who you are. He's genuinely one of those lifelong learners. He's a top guy, and he's all about sharing and doesn't know any more than anyone else. I mean, that's the way he portrays himself. He's just really good. And I think part of the reason why he's doing as well as he is because he applies himself, he shares himself, and he's open to new ideas and learning. So well done to you there.
Awesome.
That's good.
Perfect. Okay, and someone with, last question, someone with not as big a profile as Bernard Jackman, who's doing great stuff in the sport.
Well, this person has, he certainly has a little bit of a profile, but it's only just starting out. This is a coach that, unless you're from Brisbane coaching in the schoolboy competition here, you won't have heard of Daniel Ritchie. But Daniel is someone that I've spent some time with over the last couple of years. He's a young coach. I think he's late 20s. He's now just taken on the role, or been fortunate enough to take the role at last year's reigning GPS Premiers Brisbane State High School as the director of rugby. And I think someone that's got high aspirations, certainly not in any entitled way. He's certainly a hard worker, and again, one of these coaches that he's happy to look at other. Well, he had some playing experiences in Scotland and in Australia, but really dedicated to teaching and learning so that he can become a better coach. And to have this opportunity so young in his career, I'd say that's definitely an up and coming coach right there.
All right, great. All right, well, I definitely keep an eye out for him and see how he's getting along. That's fantastic. All right, well, thanks very much, Stu, for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge on the very important part of rugby, kick and catch. And, really appreciate you taking your time out and having a chat with us.
My absolute pleasure, Andy, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share some things that I've learned.
Thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at RugbyCoachSCNR or via the website at therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.